Or leveraging a wider regional grid could see Singapore's electricity imports increase to up to 60% of the country's supply mix. Low-carbon hydrogen could also be used for power generation. These are among 9 strategies rolled out by the Energy 2050 Committee to ensure Singapore's power sector achieves its target of net zero emissions by 2050. Leisha Rodney reports.
This is the latest roadmap to 2050. Supply, demand, and balancing them both, the grid. To diversify its supply, the committee's report lays out several trajectories where Singapore needs to increase its electricity imports, maximize its solar deployment, and develop low-carbon hydrogen for power generation. It also must leverage carbon markets and be on the lookout for new low-carbon supply alternatives. Pushing things along, Singapore will begin importing hydroelectric power from Laos starting this year. Keppel had signed an agreement last year to import about 100 megawatts of renewable hydropower via Thailand and Malaysia using existing electricity interconnectors.
We are basically helping Singapore to build up the energy security and energy resilience, such that in uncertain time, as and when there's disruption to, for example, our primary energy or primary fuel sources, we do not see spikes and volatility in the pricing. So this is very important.
To manage Singapore's energy demand, the report says consumers must also be made more aware of the available technologies they can take advantage of. Industry experts say this push for greater awareness is timely, as Singaporeans need to be more cautious of the energy they consume.
Many of the choices we make around energy consumption are not at the front of our minds. We don't demand energy, we demand a service. We demand transport to get from point A to point B, and we use energy within that process. And so automatically in anything we do, energy is already a secondary concept because we're not typically thinking of the price of that.
The report also says Singapore must create a multi-layered grid and leverage technology to help plan and operate it.
Infrastructure development is a long-term initiative. It takes years to build many of these substations, import infrastructure, and grid infrastructure. So it's important to signpost where we are going, to encourage companies to step forward with their proposals on how they can help grow the solar sector within Singapore, as well as regional power grids.
The world is facing many uncertainties, geopolitical trends and the pace of technological development. For Singapore to achieve its net zero emissions goal, the Energy 2050 Committee says the country will need to be flexible to navigate the challenges ahead.
Singapore is banking on low-carbon hydrogen to play a major role in powering the country. The EMA is calling for a national hydrogen strategy to develop a robust supply chain and invest in the necessary infrastructure. It's welcome news for players in the energy sector looking at hydrogen as a promising way to decarbonize.
Technology that is invested in by the power plants today can maybe take in 5% hydrogen. So the challenge is that the technology needs to mature. New gas turbines need to come on stream, and they need to be available to the power plants at a reasonable cost. At the same time, the hydrogen supply needs to be also made available at reasonable cost.
Now, for green hydrogen to be viable, the professor estimates that cost will have to drop from about $10 to $3. He says Singapore taps a very small share of grey hydrogen from natural gas, but it is exploring green hydrogen generated from renewable electricity. The EMA is aiming for low-carbon hydrogen to account for 10 to 60% of Singapore's future energy supply mix.
Singapore is also looking to maximise solar power to add to its future mix of energy supply. The government wants to stretch what is currently the country's most viable renewable resource to its full potential and scale up energy storage systems to support it. But in land-scarce Singapore, solar power can only go so far. Melissa Goh reports.
Solar deployment in Singapore has tripled over the past 3 years. But the country wants to go beyond its solar-powered goal of at least 2 gigawatt peak by 2030. That's enough energy to power 350,000 households a year. The problem, though, is where to put more panels.
We will not have enough rooftop space for that. So we have to think a little bit out of the box. We have to think a bit harder. Where else can we put solar?
One strategy, integrating the panels into building facades. Solar panels like these could line the sides of buildings. Researchers are also working on high-efficiency solar cells, which could compensate for the reduced sun exposure on the angle. Safety is also a key concern.
There is a possibility that a normal solar panel, which is made of glass, the solar cells and some plastic backsheet, that this could in principle catch fire, and then the fire could travel upwards. And so the compromise is that the solar panel is made of glass, solar cells, and also thick glass at the back.
To manage the bigger problem of inconsistent sun exposure, what's known as intermittency, the EMA is looking at ramping up energy storage systems, or ESS.
When the solar energy mix in the electricity grid becomes more and more, we know that passing clouds and rain can potentially lead to a significant drop in frequency and voltage. So it destabilizes the grid. So in such a situation, ESS will be able to discharge power into the grid within seconds in order to compensate for the power loss.
Another solution that might be within reach, anticipating the weather.
What we are currently also working on together with EMA is solar forecasting. Can we forecast for the next 30 minutes, 1 hour, 7 hours ahead of time how much solar will be generated, and then manage the power grid accordingly?
But there's only so much the sun can do to power Singapore. Given space constraints, solar power is likely to form only a small share of the island's energy mix, with diversification still key to greening the grid.